Hey everybody, Kris Gethin, and another episode of the Knowledge and Mileage podcast is upon us. While I am here in Boise, Idaho, it's fall is set upon us. It's lovely and cold. I love all seasons. However, the person that I'm speaking to on the other end of the mic, and if you're viewing this, you can see the person opposite me is Maruka, who is joining us from Mexico, I believe, at the moment. What are you doing over there, Matt?
Yeah, so I'm here basically dialing in my health or testing out some stuff, I should say, with what I call the light diet. I'm basically here to get more light to improve my body functions.
So I found that fascinating that, from the age of, say, was it like 14 and younger, you dealt with some health issues, and there was no apparent answer for you when you sought professional help, sought doctors or anything like that. And at a very young age, and you are extremely mature for your age. You're 20 years old now, I believe, but you are an absolute wealth of knowledge. When I listened to you several times, and obviously a mutual friend of ours, Tim Gray, has spoke very highly of you. I couldn't believe it when I heard that you were 18 years old when I heard about you on the first podcast, then 19, then 20. I'm like, wow, this guy knows his stuff. So what were the issues that you were dealing with, and how were you able to fix it? Or are you still in the process of fixing it?
Absolutely. So I'm definitely still in the process of improving. I am more looking towards just how much I can optimize in my body. So what I was dealing with when I was about 13, 14 years old, as young as I can remember, around age 7, was daily fatigue, daily headaches, gut issues, and allergies to pollen and all kinds of different foods as well. And, in reactions to these, I would have with the food, I would have gas and bloating, gut issues in that sense. I would have chronic immune activation. So anytime I would go outside in the spring, I would have a pollen reaction, itchy eyes and so on, stuffy nose, sneezing. And it was none of those things that actually led me to look to an alternate path to improve my health. But it was actually when I started having acne breakouts when I was a freshman in high school, and I was concerned about how I looked, being young and wanting to go out and meet girls and have fun, and getting these breakouts was just not fun. That led me to the diet world, and the diet world led me to the next level, which is, using light to improve physiology.
Awesome. Okay, so using light to improve your physiology, did you obviously went through the nutritional pathway. Did that help at all, or did you kind of went through that and you're still seeking answers, and then you came across the light aspect?
Yeah, the nutrition piece really did help me. And that was the kind of kickstart of everything, because I had seen Western medical doctors in gastroenterology for the stomach issues I was facing, as well as in allergists. And I even saw just general care doctors for headaches I was having. And each one, the primary care physicians prescribed, they suggested I take Advil for my headaches. And then the gastroenterologist suggested I take Tums for my upset stomach, the antacid drugs. Yeah, seriously. And then the allergists, of course, it was just like take the strongest allergy medication you can buy, Claritin, Zyrtec, whatever it was at that time. So I was naturally disheartened. And when I did the paleo diet first, as my first sort of dietary intervention to work on my skin, these other issues that I was not even attempting to solve actually began to fade away. That was a big shocker for me. That was the biggest shocker. And that's what sort of led me to think, okay, well, what I know now is definitely wrong. So most of what I believe now is very off. What else don't I know? It was, and the other key was that when I had applied these diets, for example, a lot of people in the world today are doing a paleo diet, an ancestral diet, a Whole30 diet, a primal diet. And even if they have some issues that they can't resolve, they're doing, for example, an autoimmune protocol of the paleo diet. So they're cutting out any allergenic foods that are triggering the immune system because they have a leaky gut, for example. Then, then they're maybe going to an even stricter version of a diet. A lot of people are doing, I'm sure you're familiar with the carnivore diet now. I was on a modified version of that diet at the most extreme point when I had huge improvements in these allergies, gut issues, headaches when I just got on the diet. I mean, imagine you're eating mostly junk food as a teenager, at least I was. And then I cut out pretty much all of the junk food, started eating vegetables, fruits, meats, and so on, and healthy fats. And then the issues basically went away, I'd say 75%, but I still had a little bit of some kind of allergy symptom going on here and there. Certain foods I would eat and I couldn't tolerate them. So I kept cutting more and more foods out, thinking I was going to get to that ideal place that a lot of these diet, experts discuss, where you find the food that's triggering your system, you let your body heal by keeping it out, and maybe you can reintroduce. But I was never able to reintroduce any foods. I just kept having these reactions, and I wasn't really feeling much better when I was on the paleo diet versus the really strict version. In fact, I started feeling worse. My energy levels started going down as I tried to remove carbohydrates. And no one in the community were able to really explain well why, after doing all the things, taking different supplements, getting different tests done, I wasn't able to, very efficiently burn fat and cut down my carbohydrate load without feeling sluggish and, heal up these food sensitivities. And that's when I learned about the biologic effects of light through some different bloggers and researchers, one of whom is a guy from down south named Dr. Jack Kris. He's a neurosurgeon. Started learning about his work and the stuff he's been putting together, which is sort of like the paleo diet applied to one's entire lifestyle. It's creating this natural lifestyle based around optimizing the mitochondria, our cellular engines, which power all of our functions, including, things like weightlifting, bodybuilding, and exercise, which of course you're very familiar with. And then the coolest part that I realized about these mitochondria is that it isn't like we need to exercise super hard to make them optimal, or we need to, do something really extreme. It's actually just living in accordance with our natural environment is a way to optimize the mitochondria. And the thing the easiest thing we can do to really destroy them is to destroy our sleep by using artificial light late at night and, disrupting our natural melatonin production, and then never getting out in the morning to see a sunrise or to be exposed to the morning light, which controls all kinds of hormonal processes.
Yeah, I always tell people, go and get yourself a dog. If you feel that you're too lazy to get outside in the morning and get some of that beautiful sunrise light, get a dog. They'll give you the accountability. You'll have to get out.
There you
Doesn't matter
go.
what the weather is. So that's something that we always try to do. Like both myself and my fiance last night at sunset, we went on the hill at the back of our house there, took the dog out there. We were earthing ourselves and getting that sunlight at evening. And I tell you what, my circadian rhythm has improved a lot. I use the blue light blocking glasses at night for sure. I need to release my melatonin, especially as I'm getting a little bit older. But by doing so and getting that sunlight, like my listeners know, I used to sleep only 3 hours a night. It isn't as good as it could be, but now I've doubled that. I'm on 6 hours a night. It's going in the right direction. But same sort of thing. I'd gone to the doctors. I'd exhausted every opportunity that I could possibly create for myself from a pharmaceutical standpoint. Okay, something helped me sleep, but I felt like shit. I felt terrible the next day. And it wasn't until I started looking at having some tests, figuring out that I did have mold toxicity. So I do have I am sensitive to mold, and then actually working upon myself to heal myself, following, okay, some supplementation, natural herbs, but it was definitely the sunlight at the right times and blocking out all this artificial light for sure in the evening, because we're addicted to these bloody things. We're always looking at the device just before bed and creating that anxiety from the moment that we wake up, if we pick up this device again. And then, hence the vicious circle. And especially my demographic, who need to recover because the recovery needs to dictate their performance. A lot of people are not recovering, and they're not looking at sleep, but they're not looking at the mitochondrial health. They're not looking at their cortisol levels as much, because we're just hitting it, and we're hitting it harder, and we're not quantifying it like on a ring or a biostrap or whatever. We're just going at it harder, especially in this space. So whilst you were talking about your sensitivities to like pollen, during the seasons of like spring and summer, I'm interested in that. Not myself personally, but like I know there's so many people, including my fiance, who deals with issues like that chronically, terribly. Do you have any tips for people if they do have any sensitivities to pollen, how they would help manage or eradicate that?
Yeah, 100%. So what I found right off the bat, the thing that eliminated, you could say, the wire brush on the wound in my situation was taking out the food that can cause inflammation in the body. So literally just a paleo diet, removing grains, legumes, dairy, especially dairy being like one of the biggest offenders if someone isn't super, super healthy. Um, Sugar, refined seed oils. These are the things that the paleo diet removes. And if people remove these, generally, at least from my experience, a lot of these allergy symptoms will go away. But the issue, and what I'm now dealing with, or I should say, I'm approaching to see how I can dial these things in even more with the light diet, is why the body is reacting to something that's so natural in the first place. The evidence is relatively clear that, we're not, first of all, the historical evidence is clear. We're not supposed to be reacting to pollen. I mean, we've evolved outdoors with the trees and the grass and the plants for so long. To not be able to smell a rose without having a reaction is insane. And so cutting out the foods that are triggering, leaky gut and basically triggering the immune system to be overactive is sort of the way to create the fastest result, I would say. But for example, for your fiance, but long term, the real thing to dig into, which is a lot harder, is to look at why is the immune system so off. And this is when we get into the focus on the mitochondria. This is where I ended up when the diet alone wasn't giving me the answers that I was looking for and the energy I was looking for. And that's when I began to learn, like I said, about these cellular engines, the mitochondria. And the key thing about the mitochondria to know is that, it's generally well known today that all these diseases we're facing, for example, everything from just as simple as seasonal allergies to chronic serious diseases like cancer, Alzheimer's, diabetes, obesity. It's been shown that in all of these diseases today, by a researcher out of Philadelphia at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. He's been at many other universities and he works with University of Pennsylvania. But he's shown very clearly, him and his team, that the modern diseases, what's actually happening is dysfunction in the mitochondria, so in our cellular engines. And so, for example, a pollen allergy, there's some level of mitochondrial dysfunction going on in the gut, in the immune system, and so on, where the body can't properly identify what's actually threatening and what's just a harmless grain of pollen. And so we want to focus on improving the mitochondria. And the way that that's done, like you alluded to, is it's actually really simple. I mean, in the beginning, it's getting morning sunlight exposure, which sets our biologic clock, the circadian rhythm, and it also drives the function of a huge amount of our hormones. And the sun directly, people can feel this, but it directly improves the function of our mitochondria. For example, I'm sure you're familiar with red light therapy and all these things today. This is a natural wavelength component of the sun, the red light wavelengths that we have been evolving in for a long time. And our mitochondria, our engines, use this red light from the sun to basically improve their efficiency in the process of generating energy. So imagine if we lived in nature, from the moment the sun came up, if we're out with our shirts off like, wild humans used to be, even the Germans, when Julius Caesar was conquering them, he wrote that even in the dead of the winter, they were just wearing loincloths. And same thing with the Native Americans when the Europeans showed up. They were dead of the winter, they were wearing loincloths and in the snow, and they were totally cool. So, wild humans pre-clothing had our skin exposed to the sun regularly throughout the day. And this is something we evolved in, and our complexity evolved along with this exposure to the light. Once we've removed this energy that allowed us to have higher level functioning, higher level complexity, we're basically, in a way, you could say devolving to match the complexity that is allowed by the environment that we're in. So basically the quick answer is cut out the foods that are triggering the immune system, causing leaky gut, because most people today are very sensitive and can't really handle grains, dairy, legumes, and refined oils and so on very well at all. But the real foundational thing to look at, which again, it takes more time and it's a little harder, is the environment that we're living in, which is causing our body to be weaker. And again, no, people don't necessarily have to go to what would be considered maybe an extreme. Like I'm testing out moving down to Mexico, being in the sun for at least a several month period straight without the winter and the summer variation. But people can, for example, just go out in the sun in the morning, like you said, be out and take a walk with your dog, put on blue blockers in the evening, and then increase natural melatonin secretion. Now, if someone's sick, it might not be enough. They might need to, if they really want to get to the root, they might need to make drastic changes. Because if you're living in a major city and you're sick, you might not be able to fix that just staying there and dialing things up a little bit. But anyone who's healthy, already performing at a high level, and adds these little pieces to the puzzle, they could have tremendous results very quickly just from a bit more sun exposure.
Got it. Okay, so you alluded to the infrared panels. Like I do use the Juve. I use it mostly when I know that I'm just not going to get the sunlight, especially when I'm traveling. I've got the Juve Go because sometimes I travel. Like I was in India recently. I was there for 2 weeks straight, and I didn't see sunlight for 2 weeks straight because I was just busy during that travel. So I'm using the Go every day just to try to manage. So if you are there like you are in Mexico, do you use infrared panels at all at any time, or you just solely rely upon the sun?
I solely rely upon the sun. I, at this point, don't think it's necessary to use that because I have such a strong, like this morning, just from being in the sun from sunrise until about 9:30 a.m. my time, which was about an hour and a little bit more than an hour ago, I got probably the equivalent of 10 sessions on one of these panels, and the thing is, it wasn't just at least 10 sessions. I mean, it wasn't just a narrow band of wavelengths, which is what these panels typically emit. It was a continuous full spectrum of all the colors that the sun contains, which all control various biologic processes, some of which are well known, some of which aren't even researched yet. So
Okay.
that's what I do. Yeah. When I have the sun around. Now, if I don't, I would consider using something like a red light panel or, for example, even a sunbed, which they've gotten a bad rap because of the evidence and the discussion about sunlight causing skin cancer, which we can get into. And so I would consider using those things in the winter. If I couldn't get to a place that had more sun, I would totally do what I could up there. And the key is also just to add, if it's cloudy and it is overcast, there's still a huge benefit to be had from getting out at least in the morning for an hour and taking a walk. There was a study that was done, this was decades ago now, that showed that people who had seasonal affective disorder, it was about 32 participants, I believe, and almost every single one of them, save for just a few, had complete elimination of their basically seasonal depression just by taking an hour walk every morning. That's pretty significant. The number of people who have seasonal depression and just never go outside, and they just go straight from there, like most people, to the home, to the car, to the office, to the elevator, back to the car and the parking lot, and then home, and hardly ever see the light, which turns out is actually kind of like a multivitamin that actually controls a ton of our body, the bodily processes. And for example, there's, like we said earlier, there's different components within the light, like the red light, like the infrared, like the blue light and its effect on the sleep cycle, that have different functions. And if we're missing all of them, we might still be eating a great diet, but the bodily functions that are reliant on sunlight, another being vitamin D synthesis, no amount of good food can make up for that. Even dietary vitamin D doesn't have the same effects as properly creating it via the skin.
Yeah, I totally relate to that. Some years ago in 2010, I was living in India. I was in India for nearly 4 years. And it was during this time that I went through some major depression myself, anxiety. And a lot of what I noticed when I look back and see what I was actually doing, of course, I exposed myself to some mold for mold toxicity. But I wasn't getting out at all. I wasn't living in the hills of the Himalayas or anything like that. I was actually in cities like Mumbai or Delhi. And you would generally go from one place straight to the next. You'd be in a car. You weren't going outside as you possibly could. And of course, there's a lot of pollution there. And as soon as I started, focusing on my health and removing, like you said, a lot of these allergens. So growing up on a farm in Wales, we're drinking milk all the time. And myself and a lot of my family members, dealt and still deal with like major asthma and eczema problems. And I started eliminating, like you said, the milk from my diet. Now, you know, and I had croup as a young child. You know, I almost died there for when I was very, very young. And now, as an adult, no asthma whatsoever, none. Touch wood, and hopefully we'll never get it again. But like you said, it's that process of elimination to see what you are actually sensitive to and not. But you mentioned briefly that we can get into you know, the sun exposure from like the sunbeds and you know, the cancerous effects that we've heard come up in discussions. Now we know that sunscreen is sales are at an all-time high. People are using more sunscreen than ever before. However, skin melanoma and cancer appears to be at an all-time high as well. And I know that you have had some discussions about this before, and I'd love to hear your take on that, on why that is. I know what my take is. I never use sunscreen, but I'd love to know yours.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Well, I was doing a bunch more research into it because I did a podcast recently with Ben Greenfield, and you know, I basically went through, and it was more like a monologue form because of the way he wanted to test out a new format. So I just went through a bunch of the history on sunlight, and I've dug up stuff I hadn't even dug up before about, you know, in the early 1900s, it was amazing. There was actually sort of a craze for sunlight between 1900 and 1930 approximately. There were tons of newspaper articles being published about the healing effects of the light. There were cartoons written, you know, making the people on the beach under the umbrella and in the clothing look like a fool compared to all the golden people who were tanning. So basically it came to be believed that more and more sun was better and better and better. But there were, you know, cases of skin cancer occurring for reasons people didn't understand, people didn't know why. And so researchers were investigating it. And eventually there were certain studies that were done on basically on mice in labs, where, keeping in mind the mice spend most of their life either in darkness or under artificial lighting. And then they would shine on them these UV lamps, UV lights. So that's just one component of the sun, just like the red and infrared panels. And then when they really overdosed these mice with UV light, they would get cancers, and basically this led to the conclusion that sunlight causes skin cancer. But there's very few studies, and none that are well done that one could actually conclude logically that the sun causes skin cancer. We could conclude that taking a nocturnal animal that isn't even designed to be in the sun a lot and then blasting them with toxic doses of UV light that would even be toxic for a human from an isolated electric bulb, which the animals are already living under artificial light anyway, which has its whole own host of problems, that will cause cancer. So I'm okay with conceding that one because, you know, that's what the studies showed. But that has nothing to do with the actual sun affecting humans, which are a diurnal animal designed to be awake during the day. So yeah, that's sort of, those are the types of studies initially: repeated burning, abusive exposure to the light, that were used to say that the sun causes skin cancer. Meanwhile, earlier than that, that was around the 30s that began. The early 1900s, there were some researchers, one guy from Denmark named Niels Finsen, who basically showed and found that the way to cure tuberculosis of the skin was just for people to go outside and get in the sun. Now, they had to do more specific targeted exposures, but tuberculosis, because it's bacterial and ultraviolet light kills bacteria, they would shine it specifically on the skin with even concentrated lamps, and it would kill the bacteria and the skin would heal, and it would be amazing. The transformations were radical. And based on his work and the Nobel Prize he won in 1903, he was the first Scandinavian to win a Nobel Prize in medicine. It's just kind of funny, a Scandinavian where they have very little sunlight. He was the first one, and it was won with sunlight. But people went on, a couple Swiss doctors went on to start what they called heliotherapy clinics, where they used the sun, like Helios, I believe, Greek god of sunlight. They named them after him. And this type of therapy, heliotherapy, was used to cure not just, for example, lupus vulgaris, the skin tuberculosis, but it was even used to cure things like severe wounds. The Germans during World War I, they set up heliotherapy clinics in Germany to heal their soldiers' wounds faster using sunlight. It was used to cure rickets because they found that the reason so many kids in the Industrial Revolution times were getting rickets was because they didn't have enough sunlight to make vitamin D to get the calcium into their bones properly. And also things like depression, they were curing at these heliotherapy clinics high up in the Alps. So this was part of the reason there was sort of a craze about sunlight, but then it sort of got shut down in some way with negative press coming out based on these studies. And then from there, the industries of dermatology, particularly sunscreen, and the sunglass industries began to really blow up. Advertising, block the rays, they cause cataracts, they cause skin cancer, even though the research really wasn't behind that. And now we have two gargantuan industries based on this premise that the sun's bad for us, when quite opposite is the case. So it's really kind of hard to change, kind of like the pharmaceutical industry.
Yeah, I can only imagine. So if somebody wants to get out into the sunlight, however, they are paranoid about the harmful rays, what is the protocol? Like my protocol myself, like we've seen now that in some countries, what they're doing with babies, that they don't want them to have peanut allergies, they're slowly exposing them to those peanuts. So maybe it's a little bit of an injection, maybe then they put a little bit into a syringe, so they measure how much that baby has on a weekly basis, and they slowly increase that tolerance. Like, do you suggest the same sort of thing with sunlight? Because a lot of people, of course, they have no sunlight, then they just go and get burnt. And then, of course, they're going to have the adverse effects of it.
That's not good.
No, not good at all. Okay, so what is your protocol of suggestion for somebody who needs to, well, we all need sunlight. We all need to get sunlight. What is the protocol? Like, go out at the middle of the day, just go out in the morning. For how long, and how would you increase that?
Yeah, so that's perfect. What's the protocol? I'll start with mentioning one thing that you made me think about earlier on when you were talking about just wearing blue blockers. The amazing thing about these processes, it's a good way to think about it is that for 4 billion years, we had this what we call the circadian rhythm, essentially, this daily clock cycle that controlled, for example, our cortisol in the morning, and then our natural bowel movement that we're supposed to have in the morning if we're optimally healthy shortly after we wake up or after breakfast. And then, for example, later in the afternoon, people can just Google this human circadian rhythm, and there's charts that show later in the afternoon, protein synthesis and muscle function is optimal later in the afternoon around 4 p.m. So theoretically, this would be the optimal time to do a workout based on the circadian rhythm for the maximum results. It's just an amazing thing because it's a simple ongoing cycle in our body that repeats itself every 24 hours. And we really weren't able to affect it until we created artificial light bulbs. But as soon as we did, and we were able to have artificial light at night, or basically create a way to keep ourselves indoors throughout the day, because before artificial lighting, if you were indoors all day long, if you're in a dark room, you're going to fall asleep because that's how the circadian rhythm works. So we would have built buildings that had a bit more natural lighting coming in if we were going to be indoors. But then we were able to build buildings where you could be in a office with practically no windows, no natural light, and just under fluorescent lights. And so we're creating these huge disruptions in these basic processes that are so foundational, especially for your audience, to repair, regeneration, sleep, health, and hormones and everything. Those are like the keys that we were really never able to do that before. So it's simply like, it's a simple cycle, and then we create something that unyokes it, and it unleashes, I guess you could say, the gates to hell within our biology with such a simple action. And that's why for power performers like yourself and people like who are doing this kind of thing, it's such a simple hack to have such profound effects. So the best things people need to know about the sun is that early in the morning, because it's coming from the horizon, it's passing through more atmosphere, more layers of atmosphere, more of the higher energy wavelengths are filtered out. So our atmosphere already filters out the toxic, radiation, for example, gamma rays and so on, the stuff that comes from nuclear reactors. That's all filtered out already. And then as the sun has to pass through more atmosphere, it filters out more of the ultraviolet and the blue wavelengths, which is why the sun appears a little more orange when it rises, because it has less blue. As it goes up, it has less atmosphere to pass through, the strongest it can ever be is if it's directly overhead, which only happens in the tropics at least once or twice a year, depending on where you are. But the point is that in the early morning, it's impossible to get sunburnt. In the first hour or so, depending on where you are, again, if you're on the equator or in the tropics, you could get burnt after the first hour, but it's still very hard because there's very little UV. So the key protocol for sun exposure for someone who's starting off is start off with 15 to 30 minutes every morning, no matter where you are on Earth, because it's most likely not going to burn you unless you're extremely pale or you have a rare disease where you literally can't be in the sun. And that's going to set the circadian rhythm. And then we want to pretty much do the same thing in the evening, be out if possible, even if it's just on the porch, looking at the declining light on the trees or the houses or the buildings or whatever, even if we're not looking directly at the sun. But if we can, if someone has the horizon, the space, or a field near their house or a hill or a boat or an ocean or a river or a lake, then watching the sunset and sunrise is really beneficial. Imagine maybe you heard while you were in India about the practice of sun gazing, the ancient practice where they would gaze in the sun. And this was known to increase, to them it was known that this would increase the size of the pineal gland, the function of the melatonin cycle in the body, the levels of consciousness, because the pineal gland where melatonin is secreted from, which this light talks to directly, is also considered the seat of consciousness and the third eye, if you will. So this is a great start, and this is going to get all of these cycles in our body that are currently thrown off back in rhythm, where our skin, which is like the largest organ in the body, can actually start to function the way it's supposed to function also. So if someone, for example, is on their phone late at night and never getting sun in the morning, then everything in the body is going to be off, and we couldn't expect our skin to be able to assimilate light properly when we go out. So that's the key. Sunrises and then evening sun if possible, and wearing blue blockers after the sun goes down is another way to stimulate that effect of the evening sunset. And we want to block all that blue light at night with blue blockers. So that's why I basically started, got into the business of blue blockers and so on. But basically what we want to do is, for building up that exposure to make vitamin D, that's in the middle of the day when the sun's the strongest, is when we have the highest exposure. UVB, which is when we can make vitamin D. So as the sun goes up higher and higher throughout the day, UVB is the last. It goes blue, comes in, and then UVA, and then UVB. And so certain places on Earth, like Idaho, for example, after sometime in October, usually, there's no more UVB because the sun never reaches a high enough angle in the sky. So then you're not able to make vitamin D from approximately now until maybe February or March. But it's okay, because just like our ancestors in Europe, we're able to get enough in the summer if we live outdoors like they did to thrive through the winter. But now that we don't live outdoors during the summer, it's a bit harder. So we have to make more of a concerted effort. Anyhow, the way the heliotherapists built up sun exposure, and we're talking, they had the sickest, palest patients who really were weak in their state. What they would do is they would start with 5 minutes of exposure per day just on the feet, and then they would do 5 minutes per day on the lower leg below the knee, and then in the feet as well for another 5. So they would have 10 total on the feet that second day and 5 on the lower leg. Then they would do 5 on the upper leg. They would basically work it up. So they would have the feet, then the lower leg, then the upper leg, then the lower torso, upper torso, and then the head. And this was a really slow way to build it up. I would recommend, because that's an extreme, let's say, for people who are very sick, just 5 to 10 minutes per day on the whole body, and then building that up, just making sure one doesn't get burnt. That's really the simplest way to do it. And this is specifically referring to summertime and or places with strong sun year round between the hours of about 9 and 4. That's when the sun will be strong enough to make vitamin D and to not get burnt. Now, and to get burnt if we're not prepared. So I recommend people download the app D-Minder, which I imagine you're familiar with. Super handy, just based on the location on Earth. It will naturally take the data and tell the user where you are. This is when UVB light to make vitamin D becomes present. And so people can actually set their sun exposures and say, I was in the sun from here until here. And then D-Minder will track it and give you an approximation of how much vitamin D you created based on your skin exposed and the amount of clouds in the sky and how long you were out and what time of day it is and where you are on Earth. That's super handy and a great way to start out. But 5 to 10 minutes per day, build it up. And then we end up building up the natural, people, we know it as a tan, but another term for it is the solar callus, like our body's natural callus to protect ourselves from the sun.
Got it. Yeah, that's fascinating. That's a good way to quantify it as well, you know, because a lot of people go out there and have no idea. They're just doing what they do. And I guess, you know, as, you know, like I am in Idaho, as the months progress, then yeah, I will have to hack that environment and use my infrared panel to ensure that I'm getting some exposure there. So now, you know, a lot of my demographic are predominantly doing their cardio indoors under artificial light. They're working out under artificial light. Not often I get my clients to go outdoors. I don't care what the weather is to do their cardio. However, the majority of the demographic are there. They hit the workout, then they go onto the Stairmaster hunched over on their phone and thinking that they're actually doing better because they're burning more calories, let's say, if the fat loss is their goal, than the person that's going outside for a stroll. How, you know, what is the optimal way for somebody who works out on a daily basis, who wants to burn fat, to actually progress? Because what are the adverse effects, I should probably start with, for them not? Okay, like we've spoken about
of course,
mitochondrial health, but there's a lot of people out there who are dealing with obesity, a lot of body fat, and they're exposing themselves, especially in this post-industrial age where they're up until like 2 o'clock in the morning or midnight, just constantly hit with all these artificial lights. You know, what are the adverse effects there, and what is your suggestion?
Yeah, it's a touchy subject for sure, because people, you know, are often very attached to the lifestyle they're living, and these things are not convenient oftentimes, to be honest. But you know, the truth is better than no truth, I would say. So what's happening when we're indoors under artificial light, like the fluorescent light, which is typically used in indoor gym settings, from at least from those that I've been to, there's a lot of blue light. And there's also a flickering effect due to the electric alternating power grid, because we chose to take Tesla's idea over Edison's idea of how we should use the power grid. So the lights flicker to a level that we can't even perceive, but that is perceived by our brain. And so we have these spikes in the blue range. Again, blue isn't necessarily harmful when it's in the sun and it's balanced by the full spectrum, but when it's not balanced, and it's just like it's not balanced in fluorescent bulbs and LED bulbs, then we have serious issues, because what the body has inside of it are these, I guess we could say, negative feedback loops, like predator and prey. You know, if the predator runs out, then there's going to be way more of the prey animal. If the prey runs out, then the predators are going to all die as well. So it's a very tightly coupled cycle in this in a negative feedback loop like this. Well, the same thing sort of occurs in our body. Blue light is, in a sense, one side of the equation, and it creates an inflammatory signal, wake up signal, cortisol signal. Then red light heals the body. Red light helps to optimize the mitochondria and so on. And we need both. So in the modern indoor workout world, if someone's just by being indoors and existing, the body's still generating energy just for all of the function. I mean, even, of course, you know, if someone's sitting down and doesn't do anything all day, they're still burning a ton of calories just staying alive. So not nearly as many as a workout, but still quite a substantial amount of energy is required to just maintain this massive being, this system that we have going on. So just by doing nothing indoors, if we're under artificial blue light, lacking the red component of the spectrum, the mitochondria in the body is being stimulated to create more reactive oxygen species. It's been shown that blue light exposure creates more of this ROS, reactive oxygen species, which is a serious inflammatory molecule. Essentially, it's a marker of, it's a free radical, and it's a marker of inflammation if in excess. If it's within a certain level, it's a natural signaling molecule. And this is happening simply because we're using energy, we're creating and generating energy, but we don't have that infrared and red part of the spectrum to help power that. So this researcher I mentioned in the beginning, Dr. Wallace, his work, he's shown with his team that anytime mitochondrial energy production is decreased, which is what happens when we're just by being under a primarily blue-based light, like the modern fluorescent and LEDs, that decrease in energy leads to an increased production of these free radical molecules, reactive oxygen species. And what these do is they mutate the mitochondrial DNA, the DNA that each of these little engines has, keeping in mind we have 100 trillion human cells, approximately between 50 and 100 trillion. It's a pretty wide margin. But within each of those cells, it's known that we have hundreds, nearly even 1,000 mitochondria. The muscle cells and nerve cells, which use more energy, these will have more mitochondria. Other cells might have fewer. Certain cells like red blood cells don't use mitochondria because they're propelled in the bloodstream and they don't need the energy. But the point is that if we're decreasing the function of, or we're mutating these mitochondrial genes inside of our cells, it's beneficial in terms of, okay, if we're thinking in terms of, okay, we're in an altered energy environment and we need to find a solution. That's sort of what it was designed for. Like the Sherpas who went to the tops of the Himalayas, less oxygen up there. So that caused mutations in the mitochondrial DNA that led to solutions. Now though, if someone's working in a gym under blue light, working out under a gym, in a gym under artificial light, particularly blue light, they're not only just generating the energy required to exist, they're forcing the body to generate a lot more energy to power that workout. So whatever negative effect is being had just by being exposed to artificial light, it's going to be significantly magnified when one's exercising indoors under artificial light without the power of the full spectrum of the sun to do this. So basically, I would say based on what I've learned and my experiences applying these things and feeling that there actually is some real solid, the evidence is solid, it actually works too. I would suggest people avoid working out indoors entirely, and always work out outdoors in the light, because not only will the results be so much better for the workouts, but also there won't, basically doing indoor workouts will ultimately end up trashing one's hormones. We'll have chronic shunting of this molecule called pregnenolone, which is turned into cortisol. It's going to be constantly shunted to create cortisol because of this blue light stimulus coming through our eyes. And therefore, pregnenolone, it's going to be stolen from the other molecules it's also used to create, which include our sex steroid hormones like testosterone, estrogen, progesterone, and all these things. So it's going to affect our fertility. So from what I've heard from discussing with bodybuilders before on different podcasts, it's often the case that people who are doing a ton of hardcore indoor workout may look really great on the outside, but the hormone panel is totally trashed. And so this would be the natural expectation if someone's doing a ton of working out indoors under artificial light on a regular basis.
Got it. Yeah. So when we look back at all those videos and pictures of Arnold and Franco Columbu and Frank Zane working out on Muscle Beach outside, maybe they were onto something there. They didn't even know it. They weren't exposed to a lot of the artificial light and working out indoors. So, of course, there's a lot of my listeners who will work out indoors. I will work out indoors. However, I'll do my cardio when I possibly can outdoors to get that full spectrum. So, a lot of people do double cardios, but they'll do the cardio in the morning in the gym, work out, and then come back to the gym later and hit the cardio again under that artificial light. Of course, we're going to encourage people to get outside and do their cardio, but how could they hack their environment indoors? Like if, my followers know that often I'm wearing like blue light blockers. However, we have photoreceptors on our skin as well. But generally, people are wearing like shorts, little tank tops, and females could be wearing some maybe some short leggings and whatever. Would you then suggest to hack that environment that they should wear blue blockers and maybe cover themselves up more when they are exposed to this gym environment?
I would suggest so, based on what the research shows on the biologic effects of light. And if the goal really is to burn calories, wearing the longer clothes will make someone a lot hotter, a lot faster anyway. So they'll start sweating like crazy and, detoxing and hopefully burning more calories as well. But ultimately, again, it's good. It's just being in, yeah. Okay. So we're removing the blue light, which is great by doing that exercise or that approach. But the thing is that there's still only coming through our eye. We're still getting just then the greens, the reds, and the yellows and oranges that are remaining in these fluorescent lights, and generally in lower amounts than the blue, because that's how they're sort of balanced. But we're not going to get as much of a benefit. In other words, people could still work out inside, but the benefit from working out is really going to be when we're under the full spectrum of the light, because everything's basically synced up. Our hormonal signals are more optimized by the sun, and we're not under the flicker of the light, none of that. So the way I would view it, again, based on the research of how light is affecting the body and how full spectrum light's beneficial, if we're working out indoors, even if we have blue blockers on, it's still going to be maybe giving us a temporary result, but for our long-term health, it's still a negative. Whereas working out outdoors is like a huge positive. So to me, it's just, I couldn't understand why, if someone were really, getting hip with the information, why they would choose to work out indoors ever. But I understand if it's like one's lifestyle and that's how they do it and it's easier. That's where most gym equipment is. You got to do it. So yeah, the way to hack it would be to wear the blue blockers and cover your skin ideally. And that's great. That's probably the best way to go about it.
Yeah, exactly. Just encourage people not to spend their 2 hours of cardio in the gym as well as the hour of weightlifting. We've got to kind of find that balance and try to control that environment to a certain degree. So, you talked a little bit about, some studies in relation to children as well. Like, I know children are being exposed now to, of course, more devices than when I was a kid. For sure, there was no such thing as mobile phones when I was a kid. However, we're exposed to it a lot more. And children are being exposed to more artificial lights, more EMFs. And there has been some studies that has directed the contribution of childhood obesity as well to this, not getting outdoors as much as we once did, playing on games, playing on computers. Have you looked into any of that research? And do you see that there are things that are conclusive in that regards?
It's fascinating. So this is a study. There was a study done, I believe it was recent, around 2015, 2016, which it's surprising, but, and to a researcher, even the ones doing the study, it probably didn't make much sense. But this mentor of mine I mentioned in the beginning, Dr. Kris, the way he understands these things, it made a ton of sense. And he was able to explain it to me and others. And the study showed that the first commonality among people with obesity, and especially in childhood obesity, is that the choroid, which is one of the layers of the eye, thickens. It's thickening. So again, obesity, it's thought that obesity is a disease related to your diet and so on and so on. But what I learned from this stuff is that because the brain is the master controller of everything that's happening throughout the rest of the body, obesity wouldn't be the result of eating too much food, because it's not an evolutionary advantage, contrary to that philosophy that, you eat more calories and you're storing them and that's it. Being obese is obviously not an evolutionary advantage. It's an evolutionary advantage to be agile, slim, and fit. Maybe you carry a little bit of extra weight around the winter, but not obesity. And so the only way obesity can actually happen in a human or in any organism is when the brain loses control of the energy accounting processes, which are governed primarily by a hormone called leptin. And so, and then basically it's one like that negative feedback loop we discussed earlier. When the control is lost, the whole system can just go haywire, essentially. Without the predator, the prey can go massive. They can multiply like crazy. Same thing in the body. When we lose the function of our hormone leptin, which is a satiety hormone created by our fat cells that talks to the hypothalamus, which is the master hormonal regulator and energy regulator in the brain, which controls pretty much, ultimately the hypothalamus directs the function of the thyroid, the adrenals, the kidneys, pretty much every organ via its secretions. So what happens, the reason this ties to the thickening of the choroid, what's pretty obvious is that, well, it's known that when we're exposed to high energy blue light from for example, fluorescent or LED bulbs, but more than anything now from the screen devices like the phones that we're talking about here, that causes actually direct damage to the eye. So one of the mechanisms the eye would naturally do is have this choroid thickened in an attempt to protect the rest of the eye and protect the retina and so on, and minimize the amount of blue light coming in. And so that's why that study is relevant, because the eye is attempting to protect itself from this blue light, and that's chronically seen across obesity patients, is that their choroid is thickened. So it implies that it's an issue essentially that starts in the eye or is related to the eye. And the way it kind of goes downstream from there on out is that the chronic blue light stimulus, especially in the evening, it's disrupting our natural secretion of hormones during sleep. Again, that's including melatonin and so on. But one of the things it does is it makes our brain leptin resistant. So the hypothalamus, just from chronic blue light exposure, in particular at night, the hypothalamus in the brain becomes leptin resistant. So even though the fat might still make this leptin signal and send it up to the brain, the hypothalamus doesn't receive it properly. And so it doesn't register while we're sleeping anymore. Okay, we have XYZ amount of energy, so we need to consume this many calories. We should be hungry. We should be not hungry, whatever. This isn't happening anymore, so that the body can literally just eat again and again and again and again. And there's other factors that are involved too. You know, once this leptin signal is damaged, people will eat a lot of carbohydrates in the modern world, and then we'll have a blood sugar spike of insulin. This is more familiar in the paleo diet, and then the insulin stores all the fat. And then because people aren't tapping into fat burning, which is another issue related to mitochondrial dysfunction, which is something I had issues with, although I was on the skinny side, not on the overweight side. My metabolism was almost, I guess you could say, overworking in a negative way, but not quite. Anyhow, though, we have this serious issue where now people are just chronically eating more and then storing it as fat, eating more, storing it as fat, and never satisfied, satiated. So that's what happens with chronic blue light exposure through the eye, and leading to this obesity that people are facing today. And there's even other studies separate from that, one related to the eye, it was done by Israeli researchers, showing that artificial light at night increases the risk of a huge majority of disease. And they're proposing, even in the scientific community over there, that this is one of, if not the main driver of the modern disease epidemic. Because when we start destroying our sleep function, everything in the body goes down, especially the non-essential things like optimal performance and optimal repair and optimal anything.
Yeah, and it's low-hanging fruit. A lot of my demographic, including myself in the past, would just look at, okay, how many calories should I consume? Not really thinking about the sources. Okay, healthy sources, but are they organic? Are they wild caught? Are they grass-fed, locally grown, etc.? Not so much. But then the light is a very fascinating thing to me, because like you said, it caused that thickening, which leads to the leptin resistance and then the insulin resistance. And no longer do we have this balance of like your mTOR and your AMPK signaling of feast and starvation. Feast, starvation. It's more so feast and storage. Feast and storage. And that's what we're seeing more and more. And we don't even have to go down a rabbit hole of the marketing that we're exposed to when we walk down the shopping aisles, or just driving down the streets. That's another story again. But I think it's something that we can all learn from. There's no doubt about it. But people are amazing at being students of learning. However, not many of us are students of applying. So I encourage everybody to start applying exactly, what Matt has said here today, because it can make a profound effect, a positive effect on your life. And, I'm saying this straight from the heart, because I am exposing myself to all these entities and I'm feeling the effects. I'm no longer dealing with a bloated stomach. I'm no longer dealing with the inflammation in my knees and my joints that I thought was just coming from wear and tear of working out and running. I feel so much better, not just physically, but mentally. My circadian rhythm is starting to finally adjust itself. So I feel better in the morning. I'm a better person to be around, for sure. I think I can actually hold down a relationship now, and, amen to that. But I just wanted to thank you, Matt, for joining me on the show today. I feel like we've just scratched the surface.
Yeah.
What were you going to say? I know you're going to say
Well,
something.
I just want to throw one more thing in. This is the key analogy that, and a great way to close, honestly, is that the engines in our cells are a lot like the engines in a car. That's great that you're hydrating too. That's key.
All the
So
time.
there we go. So the engines in our cells, the mitochondria, are very similar to engines in a car. You know, they have a fuel source going in, a hydrogen-based fuel source, just like gasoline, and then they burn it with oxygen from the air. This, when the hydrogens react with the oxygen, they make water, and it releases the energy that was in the bonds in the hydrogen fuel source, like, for example, petrol, gasoline, or when we consume it, we're consuming what we call food, which is just another hydrogen-based fuel source, whether it's protein, or I should say carbs or fats, they're still hydrogen-based. So anyhow, the thing is, just like a car's engine, our cellular engine has machinery and pieces that these breakdown products of the food and the fuel have to go into to be utilized. So now if we took a car's engine and it was worn down, in particular, let's say the spark plugs, which, work in the ignition system to ignite the gas in the chambers so that the pistons will then be fired and move the engine, essentially, make everything run. If the spark plugs are worn down, the car is not going to accelerate properly. It's not going to, the car might not start. It might have there could be misfiring in the engine and so on. This is going to be a big issue. And if we put in premium fuel into that car engine, attempting to fix the spark plugs, it's going to do nothing for the spark plugs. It'll maybe be a little bit better than when we had regular fuel, but it ain't fixing the spark plugs. Same thing with fuel additives into a car engine or changing the oil. It still won't fix the spark plugs. Now, if we look at our cellular engines, the equivalent would be trying to put in premium diet, premium food, healthier food to fix the broken respiratory proteins, which are the protein machinery that the electrons from our food jump across, where we extract energy from the food and then generate our energy in the form of ATP. These proteins in our mitochondria, the machinery that make up our engines, it's being damaged and destroyed just by disrupting our body's circadian rhythm. So just by never getting in morning sunlight and then being exposed to excess artificial light at night, we're disrupting our melatonin secretion. And melatonin is the key hormone that repairs these mitochondrial proteins, and it's the ultimate antioxidant, anti-aging hormone for our mitochondria and our cells. And so we destroy that. We're destroying the machinery in our engines just via something as simple as the light coming through our eye that we couldn't affect for however long, 4 billion years of evolution, but now we can. So the key thing is that, we can put in premium diet all day, but if we're living in an indoor lifestyle and we're not getting a lot of sun and we're getting artificial light at night, putting in the premium fuel isn't going to fix the engine, just like putting premium gas into a broken car engine won't fix the spark plugs. We have to get right to the source. And that's really tying it all together. We want to do the good food, but we also really want to focus on the light, which controls all these other processes. So sunrises, morning exposure, midday buildup, and then just blocking blue light at night with good quality blue blocking glasses, and basically darkness in the house if possible, or just red or bulbs or candles and so on. So thank you too very much for having me on the show. I love talking about this stuff and bringing it out to new audiences.
Yeah, I'm fascinated. You're staying there now in Mexico. So do you just change your light bulbs so you have incandescent light bulbs while you're there now? How do you function at night?
A great question. So I basically don't use any lights at night. I have a red light headlamp, which I don't have on me right now, but it's a little
I've seen
headlamp like
pictures
you would
of
use
you.
for hiking.
Yeah, I've seen pictures
There
of
you
you.
go.
I think it was in
And
London or somewhere at 4 o'clock in the morning on your Instagram.
Yeah, that's it. Exactly. It's funny, but it literally does everything. It's battery powered. So it lets me see, and it's the red light that doesn't affect the biology or the rhythm nearly as much as the blue and the higher energy wavelengths. So I'll use this. If I'm here long enough, I'll get some red bulbs and install them instead of the ones that are here. But in general, I'll use the natural light during the day. Like I have this beautiful scene in front of me of a little deck and just some palm trees and stuff. Behind me is the apartment where there's no lights on. So that's how I do it while I'm down here. And of course, like when the sun goes down, I'll wear my blue blockers that I make, and they look good, they feel good, they're attractive, and they block all the right frequencies. So yeah.
That's the way what about Himalayan lamps? You see these Himalayan salt lamps that everybody's using these days. Are they okay?
Actually, yeah, they are. They're very I from previous testing that I've done, they don't have any blue light. But if they change the model, I have to just recommend people just test it themselves. Although the devices for testing are hard. But yes, as a rule of thumb, the Himalayan salt lamps are great because they're an orange reddish color, and so blue light is being filtered out. That's why they appear to have that orange red color.
Perfect.
So they're super handy.
Yeah, I've got them in my room. I've also got the ones that you plug into the wall. So often if I'm traveling immediately at the hotel, those are the ones that I'll use. I'll take 2 with me. I find that's a pretty cool hack for myself. And just one last question. So I'm curious, you've followed various styles of diet to help heal yourself. What diet are you following now?
Yeah, now I'm working off like a ketogenic diet. So pretty much based on seafood-based ketogenic diet. And I think that's optimal. We didn't go through the steps of the light diet, which is the protocol that I basically share. So if people want to get those steps, they can go on my Instagram, The Light Diet, and see the posts I make where I reference different steps, or other podcasts I've done where I go through all of them. It's better, though, that we focus, I believe, on just these keys that we've talked about today, the key basics. But one of them is eating seafood as a primary piece of the diet, because what the evidence implies is that the reason humans evolved from apes, if one, subscribes to the theory of evolution, it was exposure and consumption of shellfish that really drove that change more than anything else, because shellfish is packed with not only tons of minerals and nutrients for the brain, but also it's packed in the omega-3 DHA, which is what is used to make the myelin sheathing around the nerves, which allow the nerves to conduct the electrical signals very well. And so, this is highly conserved from mother to child. This molecule is passed down. We don't break it down for energy like we do with most fats we consume. And it's passed through breast milk to babies. When women have children, women have given away so much of their DHA stores that this is what causes this postpartum depression. And it's every study almost done on fish oil shows that it has benefits. But the key thing I would point out is that consuming whole seafood is going to have a much greater benefit than the supplement. And the supplements could even be harmful because they're easily oxidized. So the last thing I want to do is consume a bunch of these fish oil pills that aren't from a perfectly pristine source, which almost none of them are, and then eat them, have them go into the places on my nerves and my brain, but then be easily oxidized and damaged while they're building up my brain. That would be a really, really bad idea and could lead someone, I think, to go crazy. Or have a lot of issues. And so whole seafood, but lower mercury sources, lower on the food chain. So avoiding things like tuna, swordfish, and farm-raised fish, shark, and that kind of thing for people, unless someone's so healthy and you're healthy inside and out and you've done the testing and everything. But for me, I thought I could handle something like tuna without realizing that I hadn't fully healed myself to the extent that I had thought. So after eating a bunch of tuna and other kinds of, even being okay with farm-raised salmon for a while, I have a higher mercury level than I should. And so now I totally dialed it back and detoxing that, starting with the sardines, anchovies, mackerel, herring, these cold water, lower on the food chain fish. And then the best are shellfish, and oysters are particularly loaded in zinc and brain specific nutrients, and shrimp are also amazing source of iodine and so on. So this is the base of the diet for me. And then consuming, avocados and stuff because they're seasonal here in Mexico. But I recommend in general a seafood-based seasonal diet for the optimal function of a human brain and a human organism.
All right, so like a pescatarian diet with a shellfish and just added fat to it. Sounds beautiful.
Yeah, totally. Meat is good, I believe, too, based on where I am now. I mean, there's so many conflicting opinions on diets and meat. The Ayurvedics, in India, they recommend avoiding meat. And, I can't wrap my head around it because some people thrive on a carnivore diet. Some people thrive on the fruit diet. But the cool piece about this that we didn't even discuss is, in short, the only diet that explains how this could work for different people is a diet that's focused on light. Because rather than there being a one-size-fits-all approach for food, depending on where people are, if you're in India on the equator, you can eat fruit all day and be super healthy. Where if you're meditating all day in the sun and using almost no energy, you might be able to thrive on almost no food. But if you live in the Arctic Circle or in Antarctica, you need the fat to basically fuel your body to stay warm. And if you're eating carbs up there and there's a mismatched signal, things aren't going to work properly in the body. So that's the situation.
I get that. Yeah, our ancestral design, our ancestral test can definitely point us in that direction as well. What we should and should know.
Yeah.
But anyway, thank you very much. I appreciate you and your time, Matt, and everything that we spoke about. I will put the links in the show notes so everybody can find that. So I appreciate your time. And is there anything else that you want to add before we go, Matt?
Honestly, that's all I would just say that. And I would say that, you know, if people want to check out on Instagram, I'm The Light Diet. And then we're going to be having there's tons of educational content on my page for my business, Raw Optics, where we make blue blockers. So people can check that out as well. And there's tons of great information there. So that's the best.
Awesome. Great.
Yeah.
Thank you, Matt. And
Thank you so much for having me on the show.
Hey, anytime. And we'll put all those links in the show notes. So enjoy your time in Mexico, my friend.
Thank you so much. I look forward to meeting you sometime in person, and have a really great day.
Yeah, hopefully I'll be at the Health Optimization Summit next year so we can hook up then.